Marvin patted his coat and pulled out a silver flask. He grinned as he screwed off the cap. "Ah, at least I left with the essentials," Hara said to Talon. "Take him to one of the rooms. Settle him in. We'll talk later." Talon nodded and guided Marvin off the bridge. Gideon said, "You all right?" Hara nodded. "I'll talk to him later when I'm not so mad." He frowned at her tone, but didn't say anything. Gideon watched as Hara concentrated on the maps. She had set the course already, so there was no need for her to be so focused. He knew it was her father. That man had more in common with dragons than was healthy. If Hara had been without her Upa, he doubted she would have survived past her childhood years. Marvin was callous as a snake. A trait his daughter did not share. Gideon realized now she would never have killed those people even if the Rosh had threatened her. She was clever enough to find a third path. Maybe he should take a page out of her book and pick a third path. Marvin might be her father, but he wasn't in her collection and he wouldn't be in his. Marvin would be treated like a dragon father, and he decided he didn't need to add him to his collection. Gideon found Marvin lounging in the mess. He was cheery with liquor. Gideon sat down and poured himself a drink from Marvin's silver flask. The con man grinned at him. "Haven't seen a dragon in a long while. I tend to steer away from you types." He tapped his temple. "You tend to be brighter than the average man. So what brings a bright spark like you to this ship?" Gideon didn't prevaricate, as he doubted subtly was Marvin's strong suit. "I'm here for your daughter." Marvin grinned, but he showed too many teeth. Marvin wasn't a friendly type. Gideon returned the grin. "You should see my teeth." Marvin's eyes sparked. He recognized the threat. Gideon left the drink on the table and left. Hara knew she had to talk to her father, though she really wanted to be childish and just run to her bed and throw herself on it and cry. Unfortunately, she had to be the adult in the relationship. It had always been that way. She knocked on the door and waited a second before she entered. Her dad was lounging on his bed with his hands tucked behind his head. The casualness was too suspicious. She quickly looked around and saw he had been hiding something in the cavity behind the drawers, as they were still slightly open. When her father looked too innocent, there was always something he was hiding. Hara would check it out later. Right now she had to get some answers from her father. Marvin smiled at her. "You are looking good. I like the clothes. More feminine. I wonder why you didn't dress more like a girl when you were younger." He always did this selective memory. It hurt more than she realized, as his actions had such an impact on her, but she knew she was barely a bump on his road. "Because you were taking me to dangerous places for girls, so I had to dress like a boy." "Oh. Where was that?" He frowned in confusion. Hara wasn't surprised he didn't remember. He wouldn't change. She waved it off. "How did you end up on that ship, Dad?" He settled more comfortably on his bed and pulled out his silver flask from under his hip. "Well, I needed to get to Siberia and they were heading that way. So I hitched a ride. But the captain wasn't very happy about the whole arrangement, and that is when you found me. Good timing on that, by the way. The Rosh government sent us." Hara wondered if it would worry him if she was working for the Rosh government instead of the Empire. She didn't tell him she had been sent as a privateer, as that was her own private shame. Instead, Marvin's grin brightened. "Perfect. The reason why I need to get to Siberia is I have to pick up something and take it to Moscow. You can stop into Siberia for me and my project will go ahead as I planned." Hara shook her head. He always had a plan or a deal going. She wasn't astonished that he hadn't changed. "What about our last project, Dad? Did that go as you planned?" The bitterness of his betrayal tainted her voice. Marvin rubbed his chin. "What about it?" We got out with the money. You got out with the money. You left me there. He frowned as he dredged his memory and then finally shook his head. I was sure you had gotten out. Where have you been, by the way? I went back to the workshop and you weren't there. Hara wanted to hurt him for being such a careless rogue. She wanted him to feel the betrayal she had felt, so she said, prison. That had been true for a short time. It would have been a permanent reality if it had not been for a generous judge. Marvin gasped and jumped off the bed. Oh, my dear, that is terrible. He reached out to her for some comfort, offered way too late. She stepped out of his reach. The offer wasn't an honest one in any case, he just wanted to bring her back under his thumb. Hara closed her eyes because she had heard these words before. When she had to leave a place without a treasured item or when she had to leave a friend behind. She had learnt the hard way that those words were merely tools for her father to get what he wanted. And right then all he wanted was a ride. Hara sighed and opened her eyes. She said, I'll take you where you need to go, but after Moscow I don't want to see you again. Marvin waved off her words. Probably sure he could convince her at some later date. But this was the last favor she would do for him, and it was for her. As closure. He didn't realize it, but this trip wasn't a gift for her father, it was merely for a client. He wasn't family anymore. She said her goodnights to him and stepped out of his room. Hara wasn't surprised to see Gideon had been waiting for her. He asked, How are you? She shrugged and he raised an eyebrow. That bad? Tears pricked her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Gideon said, I've met your father now. Hara chuckled and let her mood improve a little. She asked, though she already knew the answer. Are you still thinking of adding me to your collection? Gideon tugged on her arm and pulled her into his arms. He didn't try to kiss, but he laid his hands lightly on her waist. I would give up everything else in my collection just to have you. Chapter 12. Hara moved carefully. Angel was asleep in a small ball on her pillow. Hara didn't want to wake the creature up as she had some plans for the night. The airship was quiet as Hara moved down the corridors. She jumped when Gideon appeared in front of her. She rolled her eyes. She really should get used to him doing that. It was hours since the last time she had seen him and she had waited for him to go to bed before she had made her move. Hara sighed. Just be quiet. Considering he had managed to sneak up on her again, she didn't doubt he could be quiet. Gideon shrugged and followed behind her. He didn't ask what they were doing and just followed. They went into her father's room. She took a dropper out of her tool belt and set a few drops on the pillow next to his head. Her father snorted, but didn't stir. The drug would keep him in his sleep, but any loud noise could wake him up. She opened the drawer and the secret compartment. It contained a few letters. Hara opened one and passed one to Gideon. She wasn't shocked when she saw it was a letter from a Roche agent. It asked about a parcel and where it needed to be delivered. Her father really was working for the Roche government. He really didn't have any morals. The letter also said something about moving their efforts forward. How her father had gotten involved she could only imagine. Gideon touched her shoulder and he showed her a letter. Hara blinked, startled. It was a love letter. Overly sappy to be honest, but she wouldn't have thought her father was the sentimental type to keep a lover or letters from her. The letters were signed by an M at the bottom. Hara wondered who it could be. The letter from the Roche government were probably the only sensitive information in the lot. She slipped the letters back into the secret compartment. Quietly the two of them left. Near her room, Hara said softly, I don't like any of this. Gideon nodded in agreement. Neither. But we will have to let it play out. She knew he was right.